Like it or not, we've reached the age of media where it's much safer to do reboots and revivals of an already existing franchise rather than do something original. After all, why gamble with an original passion project when you can safely cash in on someone's nostalgia? It could be an amazing continuation of a timeless classic, unless it isn't. Or it could be a heartfelt retelling that took everything we love about the original and made it even better, unless it doesn't. Either way, it's bound to get fans talking, for better or worse. And you better believe the same rule applies to video games. Taking an older game and completely revamping it can be either a treat for old and new fans or a total disaster. And today we're giving our thanks to the ones who got it right. But first, I'd like to clear one thing up first. These are remakes, not remasters. And yes, there is a difference. A remaster is basically taking what's already finished and adding a fresh coat of paint to it, whereas a remake is rebuilding or redoing everything from the ground up. Rest assured, should the need arise,
and it will. I need the content.
We will do a remasters list someday because they're worth their own video entirely. But right now, let's focus on the remakes. More specifically, how they rank in the following categories. How much they improve over the original. If a remake manages to fix anything that was broken with its predecessor, it ranks higher. How much do they add over the original? As much as we love the OG game, it could always use a little something extra to make it feel fresh. And more importantly, how much do they recapture that nostalgic feeling of playing the game when it first came out? Will it offer a similar amount of heart and dedication that the title deserves? Even if for one brief moment, will it tug at our heartstrings and make us say,
"Good to see you again, old friend. Mountains can't be friends."
In 1993, the Legend of Zelda franchise took its first step into the world of handheld gaming with Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, and eventually the Game Boy Color. It takes our boy Link outside the land of Hyrule and far away from Zelda. Not much of a Zelda game then, is it?
You steal all the credit for work that other people do!
Anyways, he finds himself stranded on the island of Koholint, and the only way to escape is to traverse across the island and awaken the Windfish. Oh, and spoiler alert,
It was just a dream.
yeah, they really pulled the "it was all just a dream" card, and yet they made it work. Seriously, there's actually a friggin' moral dilemma that stopping the dream makes everyone on the island disappear. Already, that earns this game a lot of brownie points. But the addition of an engrossing story all at the palm of your hands is just icing on the cake. That being said, it wasn't without its boo-boos. Critics weren't too keen on the monochromatic graphics.
I can make good graphics. You better make good graphics! I'm supposed to release a video computer game on TV without this graphic!
Luckily, the Game Boy Color version improved the graphics a skosh, but there was still the issue of the awkward controls. Still, that didn't fully deter from a solid Zelda game, but what could they do to make it better? Oh, that's easy. Turn Link into a child's plaything! 2 decades later, in comes the 2019 remake for the Switch, and it blew everything we liked about the original out of the water. For starters, they gave the graphics a welcome style change with 3D graphics with toy-like characters and a diorama world. It's honestly adorable and makes the game stand out a whole lot more. Adding to it, the tilt-shift visuals still perfectly capture the Game Boy's POV for the modern setting. And to really spice it up, they added a new feature where you can customize your own dungeon levels, something that any Mario Maker fan can appreciate. But there's a catch, because there always is. For everything they fixed and got right, there's still the occasional setback. In this case, the improved graphics bring with them the occasional slowdown issue where the game lags if too much happens on screen. Unfortunately, this is bound to happen with HD graphic games, and yeah, it's annoying, but I don't think it's enough to damage a major upgrade to an already enjoyable game. That's just me. Despite being on the far more powerful PlayStation, Tales of Destiny wasn't really much of an improvement over Fantasia. The attacks were still incredibly slow, and the game would pause anytime a spell got cast. Yeah, really putting the action in action RPG there. Fortunately, all this was completely fixed in the remake. Right off the bat, the presentation is absolutely insane. Seriously, it looks good almost 16 years later. By far, the biggest improvement the remake made was the combat. It manages to accomplish the task of being insanely over the top while also being surprisingly balanced. Right off the bat, the TP system was removed and replaced with a new one. Having to hoard items was now a thing of the past. Half of your characters have elemental weaknesses, which means you have to pay attention to the attacks enemies use and plan out your party. The enemies also have their own weaknesses and resistances as well, including those to physical damage types. Since characters often focus on one element, it means that it's often required to switch characters in order to win, unlike other games in the series where you can just steamroll everything as the main character. Weaknesses deal more damage and resistances take less on higher difficulties, so this gives a risk-reward system while also keeping things fair and challenging, unlike some other games. Enemies do not randomly break out of combos either. Instead, they have a meter that builds as you attack them and break out when it's full. However, enemies cannot break out in the air, meaning juggling is the most efficient way to combo. Tekken players, this is for you. Doing so requires timing your attacks with your allies, so you have to work as a team while also managing your own attack cooldown. This completely solves the problems other games in the series had of enemies breaking out whenever they feel like it or being complete punching bags. Among those who have played it, Tales of Destiny is often considered to be the greatest game in the series, and for very good reason.
Now, if we could only get an official English release.
Man, the Japanese get all the cool stuff.
I've talked about Ys a few times in the last year, and I bet most of the people who see those entries have zero idea what the heck I'm talking about.
What the f*** is that?
Well, time for a quick history lesson. Ys is one of the oldest action RPGs around, with the first game coming out all the way back in 1987. 5 months before another lesser-known video game series got its first release. You may have heard of it. I think it was called The Ending Escapism, Terminated Tale, The Last Story. Oh, wait. Yeah, Ys is one of the pioneers for both action RPGs and great soundtracks and games. Though I admit the earlier games love taking Zelda's homework, changing a few things and slapping its name on it. Well, okay, it isn't that bad, but there are a lot of similarities between both early games. It isn't surprising that when most of the earlier games got remade, they went in wildly different directions to match what Ys was doing at the time. The two that got the most changes were Ys 3 and 4. Ys 3 started out as a 2D platformer with large difficulty spikes that came in randomly. Huh, that sounds familiar. It was also stage-based and relied on you using your shield and sword at different angles to fight enemies. In 2005, the game was remade, not as a 2D platformer, but as a 2.5D action RPG. And no, they didn't base it off of Phantom Hourglass or something else like that. Ys the Oath and Felghana focused on a combination of speedy gameplay and platforming sections, improving on the engine created for Ys 6. This made the game very intuitive, much faster, and much harder. Even with no invincibility frames and no consumable items, the gameplay doesn't feel unfair, though it will be one of the hardest things you play if you attempt it on Nightmare or Inferno difficulty. Still, to this day, it's considered one of the best Ys games. Ys 4 has its own complicated history, though. It was originally licensed to 2 other studios, so 2 Ys 4s came out within the same in-game region, but with 2 different stories. Yes, you heard me correctly. No, I don't understand it either. What matters is that one of these 2 games, Ys 4 Mask of the Sun, got a full remake in 2012 by Falcom, finally making it canon to the Ys timeline. Yay! Ys Memories of Selketa continued the new battle system introduced in Ys 7, making it more of a party-based action RPG than just using add-on. It improved the battle system, making it more streamlined and more action-focused than before. Besides the graphical overhaul and new combat system, it added in new characters, a new memory system to gain some background on our red-headed hero, and expanded the story from where the original game ended. It was the equivalent of going from Link's Awakening to Tales of Berseria. That was the difference between the 2 games. It's amazing how the difference between the remakes compared to the originals is to the point where the only things that are really similar are the stories. Considering Falcom does its best to make sure a lot of its more popular games are still brought to modern consoles, probably won't be the last we see of these remakes.
We may finally get a good Ys 5 remake. The Ys fans will get that one.
7 years. After the demise of Metroid in 2010, we waited 7 years for a new, good Metroid game. It was really rough, but it was worth it. Not only do we get a remake of a buried classic, but it's amazing! Metroid Samus Returns is, for lack of a better term, the return to form that fans of Metroid desperately craved. While this does lead to the another Metroid 2 remake debacle, which, let's face it, we could blame fans for being impatient at that point, the official product we do get is beyond worth it. The 3DS remake takes the foundation of Game Boy's Metroid 2 and ups the ante with complex environments, better puzzles, and a much welcomed addition to standard combat. The melee attack adds some pretty nifty dimensions to knocking out enemies. This is especially prevalent in the bosses and Metroid fights, where you're actively encouraged to flip them off their guard and tear into them in cinematic fashion. And speaking of bosses, the game doesn't have that many different ones, but the ones we do fight are pretty exciting. Sure, the Gamma Metroids can be annoying when it switches between rooms too often, but the Zeta Metroids are tricky enough that they're rewarding to figure out, and the Mega Metroids are a glorious step up from Fusion, laser beams and all. The new bosses are amazing too. Diggernaut is one heck of a brain blaster that really puts your Metroid expertise to the test, and I will die on a hill when I say that Ridley's fight is still freaking spectacular. Now, yes, a lot of people will continue to compare this game with another Metroid 2 remake, and understandably, people do find its gameplay tighter and the pixel style much more appealing. While I definitely agree with that, I don't believe it's worth dismissing what the official remake set out to accomplish either, especially when you look at the epilogue. I'm not going to get into too much detail for those who haven't experienced the full thing, but let's just say, eat your heart out, Other M. This is how you do an emotional scene! All in all, let's just be grateful that Nintendo hasn't chosen to leave Metroid for dead, unlike other franchises, and has decided to improve upon what's familiar so they can get back on the right track. And thanks to that, I got aboard the Dread hype train, and I'm ready for the rides to come. Come on, you shouldn't be too shocked that a remake to surpass the original Metal Gear Solid would make it on here. When you get a remake under the guise of both Hideo Kojima and Shigeru Miyamoto, and the developer of the only GameCube game more fourth wall breaking than Metal Gear Solid 2, you know we got something insane here. Like most of the remakes on here, they really went all out building this game from the ground up. The gameplay was improved to be based on Metal Gear Solid 2, allowing for more ways to interact with enemies and increasing their AI as well. This also included the option of a first-person mode, which really helped with aiming. The cinematics were completely redone too by Japanese action film director Ryuhei Kitamura, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, making them much more action-focused than the original. Though people did criticize the excessive amount of bullet time effect, which isn't too surprising since Matrix came out around then. Didn't realize Metal Gear was the first to rip that off. Besides the usual graphic and gameplay changes, we also got some nice Easter eggs with different consoles, like how they completely updated Psycho Mantis' scene to do Nintendo games instead of PlayStation ones. One interesting change they did was also re-record all of the voice lines, as switching to the GameCube caused the audio quality to increase. This meant any background noise from the PS port didn't show up here. It really was a full remake through and through. This remake was so good that it eclipses the original by a large margin. Too bad that it's really hard to grab as it was never ported out of the GameCube. Even when they moved all of the games to PS3 with the Legacy Collection, we only got the original version. Still, if you're able to get it, please do, as it is fantastic.
Maybe Super Mario 64 DS needed longer in the oven.
Rabbit Luigi, you're a fantastic YouTuber, and with all due respect, no.
Super Mario 64 is already considered a timeless classic on its own. While the game doesn't necessarily have perfect controls, it never demanded you always do everything precisely just to beat the game. There's that strangely charming edge of flawedness to how the game plays that makes it such an enticing challenge for the fans of Mario and 3D platformers alike. And in my opinion, the DS remake is the same, but in many ways better. Let's look at just how much the game adds on top of the original. multiple new characters to play with, including Yoshi, Wario, and yes, the L is indeed real. It's been so for a while now. Each character has their own special perk, like Mario's all-around movement, Luigi's speed and jump height, Wario being the absolute unit we all love, and Yoshi having his signature flutter jump and craving for Goomba flesh. Each character is interesting and fun to play, especially since they give us a different look at how each of the old Mario 64 levels work with different physics and mechanics. But that's not all it has. The game's got a handful of new levels, challenges, and boss fights to throw at us, and they're all really well done. Seriously, where else are you gonna find a Goomba King fight that's actually mildly challenging? And the mini-games? Do I even have to elaborate? You know them all. Wanted, Trampoline Time, Bob-omb Squad, Shell Smash, Sword Explode, all of Luigi's card games. There's a lot of minigames here worth your time to play and unlock. I'd even dare say these alone are worth the whole game. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the controls. Yes, the D-pad substituting the control stick can be weird. In fact, the DS as a whole has had complaints about its button scheme holding back certain games for a while. But is it really that bad? Let's be honest, Mario 64 controls have always been kind of awkward and take a level of thought to get used to, even with the control stick. I know some people have actually enjoyed using the D-pad more since the movement feels less wonky to them. So, especially for first-timers to Mario 64, I'd say both controls have their own learning curve that takes a bit of time, but it's never a chore to get used to. So considering the controls didn't hold the game back for me at all, the game as a whole feels like a straight upgrade. The graphics are nicer, the content is more than enough to keep players busy, and being able to take it to go is just the icing on the cake. Sure, many people would still rather play the original, but for all that it's worth, this is one remake fans shouldn't sleep on. There are a few JRPGs with the brand name recognition that Final Fantasy commands. Years before Pokemon was a glimmer in Satoshi Tajiri's eye, the original Final Fantasy was saving Square from going the way of the dodo. For good or for ill, when it comes to such long-running franchises, there will be games that define the franchise, and for a while, Final Fantasy XIV has made leaps and bounds in that direction. Though I doubt it will ever eclipse the legendary place Final Fantasy VII has in the Final Fantasy community and the public consciousness as a whole. Of course, this is a list of remakes, and the original Final Fantasy game came out in 1997. Few remakes are lucky enough to have so many of the people who worked on the original come back to work on the remake. Yoshinori Kitase, Tetsuya Nomura, Kazushige Najima, Motomo Toriyama, and Nobuo Uematsu all returned. All of them now had 15 years more experience under their belts. All of them had 15 years to think about what had worked about the original, what regrets they had, and wishes that had gone unfulfilled. They could have played it safe. They could have simply remade Final Fantasy VII with modern graphics, sound, voice acting, and maybe some minor story fixes and left it at that. After all, Final Fantasy VII is widely regarded as a classic, a game that people adore. Instead, they decided to boldly charge ahead. The story, the gameplay, the characters, the graphics, everything was looked at with a critical eye. They weren't afraid to make the changes they wanted. This wasn't just going to be Final Fantasy VII, but prettier. This is going to be a true, from the ground up, remake. However, while I applaud their ambition and creativity, the fact of the matter is that what we have so far is only part one of what's supposed to be 3 parts. We only have the first disc. So without knowing how the rest of the trilogy goes, I can't really place it any higher on the list in good faith. Still, I eagerly await what comes next. If it ever comes out, please come out. Live Alive is a fascinating experience. It's an RPG with a grid-based battle system that encourages strategy based on positioning and range. And for the time it came out, it's pretty much on par with Legend of the Seven Stars with how fresh it is to have a non-linear RPG system. And the story, well, stories pay homage to various genres like kung fu, sci-fi, fighters tournament, and even shonen giant robots.
Now there's a new twist on a tired old gag.
You said it, Joe.
All of these have their own interesting twists and turns that seemingly build up to something bigger. Looking at the original though, the age really shows. While the stories are still great, the gameplay really doesn't do much in terms of polish and intuition. They just throw you to the line stand without explaining to you how the mechanics work, and you're supposed to just figure things out on your own. And to be fair, that's what gaming manuals were for back in the day, but any who played the fan translations were SOL on that front. Yeah, for a game with a lot of features to keep tabs on, that can be a big turnoff. Doesn't help that the game's vague sense of direction, you're probably gonna get lost not knowing how to progress the story. The near future chapter is the most guilty of this. Thankfully, the remake did wonders in improving that by giving us a slew of tips we can refer to whenever needed, as well as clearer indicators of elemental moves and weaknesses. You have no idea how much more fun battling feels with all of these on hand until you actually play it yourself. And if getting lost isn't your cup of tea, there's a radar that can help you get wherever you need to. It's definitely useful, but again, can throw its fair share of curveballs, whether we like it or not. But even with all that aside, the presentation is legendary. The use of HD 2D looks so good here with lively environments and for once, no annoying fog filter. The song remixes are also beautifully on point, and the voice acting is surprisingly top-notch. You gotta hand it to them for going out of their way to find ethnically accurate actors who can pull off some stellar emotional range with every character. It really adds a lot to the weight and impact of chapters like Distant Future, Imperial China, Wild West, and especially Middle Ages. The game still isn't perfect, of course. It still has its fair share of self-indulgent storytelling and tendencies to be frustrating for no real reason. Anyone who did pacifist Edo Japan knows exactly what I'm talking about. But even then, it weirdly adds to the experience. It may not be spotless, but the tight experience Live Alive offers on top of how gorgeous it is will certainly keep players coming back for more. If you haven't played it already, go for it. Trust me. With what I have planned for the future, you're not going to want to miss out.
For over 2 decades, players of the original Resident Evil 2 have cried out in anguish over the same need and desire.
I gotta go to the bathroom.
But there was no bathroom to be found, and we were left to suffer. But then, 21 years later, a miracle was made. Capcom witnessed our torment, and they gave us something we desperately needed. They gave the RCPD their bathrooms back.
The original Resident Evil 2 for the PS1. Still a really nice chapter in the franchise. It was atmospheric for the time, had a suspenseful storyline, and overall excellent gameplay for the time. Yeah, a lot of things about this game didn't age gracefully. The voice acting could have been better, the graphics are dated, and some relationships felt more half-baked than intended. There are also issues with the controls, made even more frustrating with them being in tank mode. Tank mode's a bit of a rite of passage for gamers, to be honest. In 2019, Capcom decided it was time to give this classic a fresh coat of paint. It only took them 20 dang years since they remade the first Resident Evil, and when they wanted to upgrade, oh, they really upgraded! Already, right off the bat, we're treated to high-quality character designs, lighting, and cinematography that give the game an immersive, terrifying atmosphere. But it's not just the aesthetics, no. They fine-tuned everything that worked in the original and overhauled what didn't. That groan-worthy romance between Ada and Leon reworked so it feels more realistic and a little tragic. Those annoying escort missions? Bye-bye! Oh, and the zombies? Way more terrifying and challenging. Now they feel much more like a legitimate threat, especially since they won't fucking die! Which brings me to one of the most welcome changes of all, Mr. X. The big lumbering muscle of the original game, Mr. X was, I mean, yeah, obviously didn't want to be caught by him and he knew how to make an entrance, but getting away from him didn't really feel that satisfying. That all changes in the remake. Along with being a lot more unsettling to look at, they also amped up his AI, taking inspiration from Nemesis from RE3 and making him way more adaptable. Now he feels like a legitimate stalker, and the minute you hear those heavy footsteps, you can feel your heart jumping out of your chest like a bowling ball. You're gonna have to work fast and smart if you want to make it out alive. And yeah, naturally, there's always gonna be a few kinks along the way. Claire's campaign isn't that different from Leon's, the police station is more of a maze, etc., but RE2's remake managed to fix the original's errors, add more spit and polish to what made it great, and even took some of the best elements from other Resident Evil titles, all rolled together in a love letter to a great horror game and made all the more horrific.
Thankfully, I don't scare as easily. At least most of the time.
Nier Replicant, fresh new look and voice acting. Half-Life Black Mesa, started as a mod and then grew to a game all its own. Kirby Superstar Ultra, not much to improve over the old classic, but the gallons of additional content are worth it. Oddworld, new and tasty, completely remaking a 2D classic from the ground up, and it translates super well. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, it would be on the list, very high on the list, if not for ActivePlace's greed limiting play. Shadow of the Colossus, still debatably inhumane, and not entirely sure if this isn't just a remaster, but undeniably fun and harrowing. I'm sure you all saw this coming, but what would a list about remakes be without talking about Heart Gold and Soul Silver?
Did someone say Heart Gold and Soul Silver, my absolute favorite games of all time?
Oh, no,
Come on, Josh, these games are important
stop.
to me.
Look,
I
this is
need to
my
talk about
candle.
it. This
You
is my
can't just-
territory. Get out!
Look at me. I am the captain now.
Pokemon has a long history of remaking older generations in the format of the current gen. Some generations more than others. I'm looking at you, Gen 1! It's a trend that started in Gen 3 with the first remakes of Gen 1, Fire Red and Leaf Green. Oh, what innocent children we were. While Fire Red and Leaf Green were decent games, touching up Gen 1 with the modernizations of Gen 3 like abilities and natures, they were still just Gen 1 with a better coat of paint. At least that's better than what happened with BDSP. Rip my second favorite generation. Then Gen 4 rolled around and Arceus saw fit to bestow us all with the glory that is Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Where Fire Red and Leaf Green were just Gen 1 done again, Heart Gold and Soul Silver blended both Gens 2 and 4 together, but it also added plenty of their own additions. You can walk with your partner Pokemon! Game Freak, why is it 13 years later and this still isn't standard in every game? Yes, you put it in Scarlet and Violet, but even then it's not the same. I digress. Johto is brought to life beautifully in the Gen 4 engine on the DS. There are some areas of the game that I could just stare at for hours. They're so gorgeous. Mwah! Oh, yes. Ecruteak. Oh my goodness, it looks beautiful. The movie where Lugia and Ho-Oh show up. Yes! The sound design is also an absolute treat to listen to. Lugia and Ho-Oh finally got their own songs. Like I said before, Legendaries didn't get their own themes until Suicune did in Gen 2. Not even Lugia and Ho-Oh at that time. Even after you become the very best, like no one ever was. There's the fun, if shallow, Pokeathlon that has some actually pretty decent prizes. Catching Pokemon based on what the radio station is playing, the much beloved Battle Frontier that still hasn't made its return even in the Gen 4 remakes, excuse me. And of course, the trippy ruins of Alph. I know of people who have maxed out the in-game clock. And finally, you can actually get all the phone numbers for all the gym leaders in both Kanto and Johto, and you can fight them all with advanced teams from all of the generations, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yes, please. Okay. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't admit that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire had been in contention for this slot. However, while those are both amazing remakes in their own right and arguably have higher highs than Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they also have lower lows. Heart Gold and Soul Silver are just deep, enriching experiences from start to finish. It doesn't need to rely on gimmicks like flying on a Latios' back to find Hoopa rings that take you to random legendaries. It doesn't need Mega Evolving, Primal Reversion, Busted Sky Noodles, or even an added episode. They just made the original game, but better. Keep in mind, though, there is only one thing missing. A Switch port. I'm waiting, Nintendo. Where is Mama's port? I want to play it on the big TV.
I'm the Fiery Secretary, he's the Fiery Joker, and which one of his lists do you think need to be remade?
But wait, what?
Have fun, dear.
everyone, this is Josh. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Please check out my other social media like my Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr. Check out my other channels such as Joshua Burner for reactions and other stuff, Dragon Fighter Gaming for tabletop, and Bob Equestria for cartoons. Consider checking below the video and donating to my Patreon, Streamlabs for my merchandise, or becoming a YouTube member. Thanks for watching.